Hello, church family. Welcome to your Word for Wednesday this week. And today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 11. And I'm going to read verse 30, just a single verse. And it's really just one part of the verse that caught my eye earlier today as I was reading. It says, "The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise." He who wins souls is wise. That's what really caught my eye. Because how much do we as Christians take just the opposite of approach? How many times do we as Christians find ourselves in a debate, disagreement, or an argument, and our goal becomes to win that debate or argument or disagreement? I spend time on Twitter, called X now, and I see a lot of people on that platform claiming to be Christian, but what's their goal in being there? They all engage in political activity, political discussion, and very rarely do they try to win the person, rather they try to win the argument. And you may be saying, Pastor Tom, what's the difference? Well, thanks for asking. Let me explain a little bit of the difference. Years ago, I was reading this book that you may have heard of, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And one of the chapters in this book states, let me find it. It says, you can't win an argument. In fact, the author says in that chapter, no person has ever won an argument. Now, why is that? Because arguments, even though you may present your case better and you may get your way or persuade people to accept your opinion, a lot of times, most times, when you're doing an argument, you may win the argument and presenting your case better, but in the process you lose the person. You alienate the person from you. And that can be something that can come back to haunt us later in another disagreement where they may still be chafing over their last loss of an argument and be even more steadfast in their opposition to you. A better way is to win a person over to, for lack of a better word, being your friend. There's a story of Benjamin Franklin who, during his time in the Continental Congress leading up to the American Revolution, that there was another member of the Continental Congress who was always opposed to him. On every single issue, this other guy seemed to take the exact opposite position that Benjamin Franklin took. And in order to fix this problem, Benjamin Franklin approached the guy and said something along the lines of, I hear you have a certain book in your library that I've been wanting to read. Would you mind lending that to me? So he asked this guy to borrow a book, which the gentleman obliged and let Benjamin Franklin borrow the book. And after that time, anytime there was a disagreement in the Continental Congress, this gentleman came around to Benjamin Franklin's positions a lot more quickly, a lot more readily. Instead of having to be on the losing side of an argument, this guy usually came over to Benjamin Franklin's positions. Why? Because Benjamin Franklin focused on winning the person instead of winning the argument. And in winning the person, he found it a lot easier to win the argument. And how often do we as Christians get caught in this trap? We're living in a pluralistic society nowadays where we're not all Christian. We've got other religions and we got atheists, a lot of whom are very argumentative with Christianity. And a lot of times we as Christians like to stand up to those arguments and argue right back. How often in our churches do we have disagreements and debates? I can't tell you how many churches I've heard of that had huge splits because there were two sides that were more focused on winning arguments instead of winning people. I can't tell you how many church deacon board meetings I've heard about where they have degenerated into name calling and screaming and shouting matches and even challenges to, hey, you want to take this outside? Because they were more focused on winning an argument instead of winning people. Paul tells us in the epistles to speak the truth in love. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but if we're just speaking the truth, then a lot of times we find ourselves speaking that truth in a way that it's impossible for people to hear us. And if we just focus on love, well, that gets, degenerates into, feel-goodism that doesn't get anything done. It's both of them working together. We need to speak the truth in love. And then that way we win people, and by winning people, we win more arguments. So just a little thought, something to think about as you go through the week when you run into people who disagree with you, whether it's other people in the church disagreeing about how the church should be run, or whether it's people you're run into while you're out running errands, or people you meet online. The world's full of people who are ready and waiting to argue. But we as Christians need to focus on winning people, not arguments. Thanks for joining me today.